Welcome, everyone. Good afternoon. Professor Claudia, you can open your camera and your microphone, please. It's a great honor to us from School of Public Police and Government of Getúlio Vargas Foundation to welcome Dr. Claudia Nancy Avellaneda, Associate Professor at Indiana University O'Neill School of Public and Environmental Affairs. Dr. Claudia specializes in government and public police management in developed countries, with an emphasis of decentralization, public police, innovation, government, and public management. Dr. Claudia will present an overview of research in public administration in Latin America, emphasizing the importance of identifying patterns in government's performance, exploring relevant and practical research issues. Getúlio Vargas Foundation thanks you for your kind acceptance. Now, let's move on of the Claudia lecture. You will have approximately 40 minutes of presentation. After that, I ask who follow us on YouTube to send questions and doubts to stimulate the debate. An official warning, actually. All statements expressed by Fundação Getúlio Vargas employees and guests in all our online events and broadcasts exclusively represent their opinions and not necessarily FGV institutional position. We also reiterate that everyone present here agreed to participate in this event on their own free will and consent to will be posted later of FGV official channels. Now, Professor Claudia, I ask you to share your screen and start your presentation. Very, very thank you for today.
Thank you very much, Alejandro, and to everyone for the invitation. Actually, 1 week ago, I gave also another presentation for INAP, and so I'm sorry if there is overlap in the audience, that the people that already saw part of this presentation through INAP. And it is always a pleasure to me to give a talk in Brazil. I was telling Lisandro that I hope to spend at least 1 semester in Brazil so I can really learn Portuguese and I can give my talks in Portuguese. And so the research that I'm going to present today is just like an overview of the type of research that probably I would like to encourage everyone to start doing either in your own country or across countries in the region. These are thoughts about public administration research and why they tend to be relevant. Sometimes we see research with something that is too abstract, that this is not actually related to practitioners, and that is not the case. So what I try to show here is the way that we can do research to improve the governmental performance in our countries, either in the federal level, state level, or local level. And feel free to provide any questions, and I will try my best to respond, okay? So, and do you see my screen? Excellent. Okay. So what are the goals of public administration research? So our goal is actually to study relevant questions that really are going to have implications for real life events. I always tell my PhD students the importance of studying something that are going to have real life implications. In doing research, what we're trying to identify is patterns, systematic patterns and relationships. Those patterns and relationships might allow us to generalize knowledge through one event to other events. But this is our role, to identify this is what continues happening across the municipalities in Brazil. So we should do something about it because it happens over and over. or this is what tends to happen in the states in Brazil, especially close to elections, so we can identify that pattern and we can correct for that or predict that potential pattern and do something about it. I want to emphasize here the importance of giving attention to the choices of data and statistical methods that we use in order to process the data, instead of paying too much attention about data and the methods themselves. Sometimes we just care about having data. Oh, this is all. Let's have data, and let's use these methods, when we don't pay too much attention about what is the most appropriate data and what is the most appropriate method to analyze this data, okay? And so the idea is that if we analyze data and we choose the right data set and the right research question or the appropriate research question, then our research findings can be actually applicable to practitioners when they do their decision-making process. Okay, but that is something else. How they learn about our research is something else. Okay, so I want to tell you about what are some of the hot questions that now we care in public administration and also in public management or governance. One of the very hot questions is why governments fail. It could be at the national level, it could be at the state level, or it could be at the local or municipal level. Why governments do not do what they are supposed to do? Why governments do not deliver the public health that they are supposed to do? Like right now in the case of Brazil, everyone knows that it has overwhelmed the health system in Brazil. So why did the health system in Brazil fail? So we can say that. So in answering that question, we can answer, okay, was that a political failure or was that a bureaucratic failure? Or it could be both, political and bureaucratic failures, okay? So why we need to investigate what are the causes of this failure? Well, we adopt reforms. Every country, every government adopt reforms. The idea of these reforms is that they are going to improve the performance of government by delivering more services, okay? But many of these reforms fail, even despite the fact that politicians have the best intentions with the reforms. I truly believe that if a politician implements and adopts a reform, it is because he or she wants to improve the performance of government. However, not all the reforms are successful. And these failures could be political or could be bureaucratic. And most of the failures tend to be political. Why? Because the policy or the program has ambiguous and contradictory goals. So the bureaucrats or the managers, when they need to implement a policy or a program or a project, they don't know exactly what is the goal to be achieved because there are too many goals and they feel like there is just a competition across goals and there is ambiguity. Which of these goals should I care more, okay? In our case, in Latin America, another political failure derives from constant personnel turnover. Especially at the ministry level, we see that presidents tend to vary the ministers, and even actually there is actually an average time for a minister in Latin America tends to be only between 6 and 8 months. So when the ministry comes, he or she has to start learning the process. When she's about to start learning the process well, then a new one comes. So it means that there is no institutional memory, there is no continuation in public management. Another key political failure is the lack of financial support. We assign responsibilities, but they come without financial support. Another problem, political problem, is granting too much autonomy or not granting autonomy to the bureaucracy that is in charge of doing something. So bureaucrats know what are the obstacles that they have to overcome. And sometimes they need certain level of discretion in order to maneuver and do what they have to do. But if they do not have that autonomy, it will become just extremely obsessive for them to do something, okay? So when there is political failure, how does a rational bureaucracy or how do bureaucrats respond to these problems? Does the bureaucracy have capacity in order to deal with these problems? Because there might be a political failure, but if we have a very capable bureaucracy, we might overcome that political failure. So we need to know how bureaucrats respond to that, okay? So in doing that, a key research is to identify what is the managerial capacity in the organization. Existing research has explored what are the drivers, what are the determinants of managerial capacity in one organization, yes? However, those studies tend to assess managerial capacity with objective and subjective indicators, but very few objective. And we want to assess these concepts objectively, not by asking people, do you think that we are capable or not? No, by assessing with very hard numbers that can be taken over and over and they will be the same repetitive values, that this is actually the assessment of capacity of an organization. Why? Because capacity is very important to contribute to organizational performance. So the notion is that the higher the organizational capacity, the higher the performance of the municipality, the higher the performance of the minister, the higher the performance of the state, the higher the performance of the country or the organization in general. However, when we talk about organizational capacity, we tend to use three terms interchangeably: capacity, capability, and competency. And actually, these are three different concepts that tend to be related, but are not the same. So let's identify, for example, what do we mean by the capacity, capability, and competence of the agency in which you are working? FGB, what is the capacity? What is the competence? What is the capability of AGB? What is the capability or capacity of INAP? What is the capability or capacity of the Ministry of Health, okay, in Brazil? Okay, so let's first try to describe these concepts. For some scholars, they say capacity refers to the resources of the organization, financial and human resources. The organization needs both types of resources. So the question is, does having enough resources lead to performance? Or are resources enough to improve performance? In other ways, are they necessary and sufficient to improve the performance of an organization? Probably not, because you might have money, but if you don't know how to spend the money, you might not contribute to the performance of the organization, okay? So you might have a lot of capacity in terms of resources, but you might not have the capability to use those resources. So that's why capability refers to how the organization deploys those resources. What is the capacity of the organization, the capability of the organization to distribute the resources and the key items or the key services that are needed? Does it make sense? Do they have the right personnel in order to deal with the resources? Okay. Capability plays a huge role in strategic management, because when the manager is designing the strategic plan and the strategic goals for the organization, the manager needs to know, okay, what are the resources that we have? What are the capabilities that we have right now to use those resources? So that's why capability becomes extremely important for strategic planning and strategic goals, because the manager needs to know who are the right people capable to deal with these resources. One way to boost the capability when you don't have enough human resources is through intergovernmental collaboration. So you might not have the right personnel to deal with, for example, grant applications. Governments need a lot of money. Municipalities need to write grants. States need to write grants. But probably you don't have the right person to write the grant. You might collaborate with the federal government so the federal government can give you the technical expertise or the technical person that is going to teach you how to write grants. Does it make sense? So this is a good way to boost capability by getting technical assistance, information, skills, and learning from other level of governments, okay? But also it might create conflict. Not always to collaborate with other level of government is easy, but at least this is a way to gain capability by collaborating. Now, let's talk about competence. That is something different. The organization might have resources, might have personnel, might have money, might have probably capability to deploy those resources. However, we want the organization to develop competency. Competency means to develop expertise in doing something extremely well. Okay, so I have been doing research about local governments in Latin America already for almost 14 years. So I am accumulated expertise slowly and over time in doing this. I hope so. Yeah, I hope so. It should be. So that is, and your organization will like to accumulate expertise on something. If it is the Ministry of Health, so they will like to accumulate expertise and dealing with crisis. You see, they will like to develop expertise and collaborating with other entities to deliver public services, okay? Why? The idea is that the experts tend to be faster and more accurate when they make decisions. Because with a new decision making comes to their mind, they have already so much information that the new information will trigger more connectivity among all the knowledge that the expert has. So that is the notion of developing expertise, developing competence. And the higher the organizational expertise in doing something, the higher the performance of the organization and that particular task, okay? So now, let's identify cross-time and cross-units or cross-departments or cross-variations performance in terms of capacity across units, okay? So why do we need to identify those patterns or those variations? Because this is important when every unit, every municipality or every government or every country behaves the same, we don't need to explain variation. It means that they are doing exactly what they are supposed to do or there are no variation. But the intriguing thing comes when you find variations across families of the same group. Why? These are the same municipalities. They receive the same amount of money from the federal government because this is based on population and why they intend to perform different. So in doing that, we have to collecting and systematizing agencies' data at all levels of governments. We have to visualize data and the metrics in order to identify those patterns. We need to track the performance of key indicators to see we see variation across time and across units. We need to set up benchmarks and goals to see who is achieving the goal and who is behind and why there is no achievement of goals, homogeneity in achievement of goals. And then we compare our own agency performance against all these benchmarks, okay? How to identify variation, the cause of variation. Once you see that there is variation in performance, then you need to identify the cause. And this is very key because if you don't identify the cause, no matter how much money you have, the problem is not going to be fixed. You only fix the problem when you identify the cause of the problem. Otherwise, you are wasting time, money, and energy. So the cause must happen prior to the outcome, prior to the event, prior to the problem. When the causes change, also the event changes. If you see that there is this correlation. And there might be a logical explanation for this correlation. Oh, I noticed that when money is not given to the municipalities, they tend to decline service delivery. And when money comes from federal government, service delivery increases. So there is a correlation. One happens first, the other happens later, and when one goes up, the other one goes up. When one goes down, the other one goes down. Make sure that when you do this, you are not omitting the variable that might be causing both the cause and the event. So it might be the case that you say, oh, this is what is causing. Actually, it's not that. It's something else that is causing both things, okay? So let's see variation of government capacity across Latin America, and then I will show you variations in governmental capacity, particularly in Brazil, okay? So for example, I do research across Latin American countries. Chile has 16 regions. So I took here 2 regions in Chile, 11 region and the 5th region. Both regions tend to, let me see if I can get here the clicker or the mouse. So we see that both regions apply for grants. Let me see. Can you see the highlight that I'm doing here? I know, sorry. So both regions apply for grants, okay? And this region, the 5th region, applies also for grants. But we see that the effectiveness in getting grants varies a lot between 2 regions. For example, in 2013, the effectiveness in the 11th region in getting grants was only 10%. It means from all the money that they ask for, they obtain only 10% of grants. While we see that the 5th region in 2013, the effectiveness in getting grants approved was 30%. What explains that? Is that a political factor? Is that a capacity factor? It was the quality of writing the grant? Or is this because a region has more personnel dedicated just to write grants? Or what? Okay? Already you see variation. You have to explain this variation. What is causing this variation? Let's see, for example, Mexican states. So Mexico has, and the states, so far, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 32 states. So we see that actually there is also variation in terms of high school enrollment across Mexican states. So we see that most of the states tend to have a increasing level of performance in terms of high school enrollment, okay? But still, we see, for example, the case of Veracruz that tends to have still a very low high school enrollment compared, for example, to Distrito Federal. Of course, Distrito Federal tends to be higher performance because they have probably more resources. But we have, for example, Zacatecas. It has still very high school enrollment in 2010 compared, for example, to Baja California del Sur. It has been actually like stable, the performance in high school. So what is that? If this variation is explained by the Secretary of Education that is appointed at the state level, or is explained by municipal capacity in hiring more professors, or is explained in the municipal incapacity of approaching more students, to convince more students to study, okay? Let's go to my beautiful country. I am originally from Colombia. So Colombia has 32 departments. So let's see how Colombia is doing in terms of high school enrollment from 2004 to 2013. So we find outliers. So we see that, for example, there are some departments, like for example, Boyacá, that has been doing extremely well. They started very low and look at right now how high they are. But still we see other departments like La Guajira, that is extremely low in high school enrollment. So again, let's explain this variation. And you can do it across time. Let's compare Cundinamarca, for example, with Guinea. Also, very poor variation, very poor performance in Guinea, okay? Let's do the same with Ecuadorian provinces. So in each country, each subnational government has a different name. So in Ecuador are provinces. So in the case of Ecuador, also we see a lot of variations. So Ecuador has 24 provinces, and we see, for example, in terms of capturing international aid, municipalities and the states have the ability to capture international aid. So we see that actually there is a lot of variation, and sorry, I didn't turn my cell phone off. I'm so sorry. So we see a lot of variation in actually capture of international aid. But you see that in 2012, most of the international aid declined across all these pictures. Did you see? It was high and then declined. Here it was high and it declined. Why? So we found this pattern, and I was doing this with one of my PhD students, and now he is already a professor in the University of Oslo in Norway. And so we said, what is going on over there, Julio? So immediately Julio started finding out in Ecuador what was. Well, in 2012, Ecuador passed a law, national law, saying international aid now is going to become a responsibility of the municipalities. Before, it was the central government responsibility. Then it went to the municipalities. So it declined because the municipalities didn't have the capability to reach out to donors in order to capture. So did you see the beauty of graphing the data? Because you find patterns. And so by that, we tested that by granting responsibilities to municipalities without giving them technical support, it is going to decline the performance in achieving international aid. Okay, so that is the importance of that. So now let's see variations in performance in Brazil. I guess that you are going to be excited about doing that. So how see the Brazil states are doing in reducing infant mortality rate? We want to reduce the infant mortality rate. So we see, for example, that the state of Alagoas has done a very good job. They have reduced the infant mortality rate, okay, across time. So this data grows from 2000 to 2015. But we see that, for example, the state of Pernambuco also has reduced the infant mortality rate. But we still see other states that they tend to have relatively high mortality rate. So we say that, for example, I don't know how to pronounce this, Piauí, something like that. So
Piauí.
I'm sorry. I promise that someday I will learn.
Okay, it's okay. It's okay. It's a tough one.
So anyway, you see variation, okay? And you see, for example, in Rio Grande do Norte, we see that something happened in 2016 that declined the infant mortality rate. So you will have to see what happened in 2016 in that state. Was there a new policy? Was there a new program? What happened that declined the infant mortality rate? And probably what they did can be done in another state in order to see the same decrease, okay? Now let's see how Brazil is doing in terms of reducing illiteracy rate across the states. So, okay, so we see that Alagoas start very high with illiteracy rate, very high. They have reduced it a little, but not too much, okay? But we see other states like Paraná that they tend to be doing better in reducing illiteracy rate, okay? And there are others like Distrito Federal, of course, that is very low. They tend to be rich. But these are just a way to see patterns and to see who is doing well and who is doing bad, or who is doing something good that we can copy or emulate from that state and to transfer to other areas. Now let's see let's see how they are doing in terms of covering electricity coverage across the states in Brazil. So we see, for example, Acre. Something happened in Acre in 2004 that declined the electricity coverage. It could be that the data was collected wrong, or there was something in the state that was wrong during that year. But suddenly it went from high electricity coverage to very low electricity coverage. And then it has climbed up, okay? But we see that Alagoas has done very well. They started with 80% of electricity coverage, and now they have a 100% of electricity coverage. While still, we have some states, for example, the Piauí, that still needs some electricity coverage to be done, okay? So let's see how they are doing in terms of sewage coverage, okay? So we see that, for example, Rio de Janeiro, perfect, 100% in sewage coverage. But we see, for example, that Acre still has only 80% in sewage coverage, okay? So Maranhão, look at this, it still has 80% of electricity coverage. So let's see those patterns to identify why some states are doing better than others, okay? And also in reducing unemployment rate. So we see, of course, this data is only until 2015. Now with COVID, things might be different, but we see a lot of variation, for example, in our AMAPA, we see that it varies a lot of unstable, a lot of instability. And we see that other states tend to be more stable, like Minas Gerais. You see, it has declined the unemployment rate, but however, it tends to be more stable, okay? And now, for example, at the municipal level, and this is some work that I have been doing with Professor Adamir Gomez from the University of Brasilia. We are right now studying this, the Rio Grande do Sul, looking at all the 498 municipalities of Rio Grande do Sul. So we have data for all the municipalities in terms of the evolution in the creation of pro-women institutions. We see that Brazil has a lot of problems in terms of violence against women, okay? So one way to deal with that is by creating pro-women institutions at the municipal level in order to support women's rights. But although every municipality is allowed to create pro-women institutions, we see that there is a lot of variation in the number of pro-women institutions. So in 2013, across all the 498 municipalities in Rio Grande do Sul, very few had at least one pro-women institution. In 2017, we see that those blue points went higher. It means that some municipalities adopted at least one pro-women institution, or they move from 1 to 5. What are the pro-women institutions? Having a municipal human rights law. Second, having a police staff only for women issues and by women. Another one is having a ombudsman for women issues, okay? And there are other pro-women institutions, having a shelter for women that have been exposed to violence. Another pro-women institutions is having an attorney advisor for women under certain issues. So you see the variation. So what explains that certain municipalities are more pro-women oriented than others? Is this because they have a woman that is a mayor? Is this because they have more city council women? So I'm doing that research right now with Adamir. We already submitted that research to Public Administration Review. We hope that that article is going to be published, okay? And but this is a beautiful way to graph data and to find variations, okay? And we see actually here how the number of pro-women institutions has varied across municipalities in Rio Grande do Sul. So for example, in 2013, from 498 municipalities in the state, 417 had not a single pro-women institution. That number was reduced to 389 in 2017. So a little progress, not too much, but something is something, okay? So also we can see a lot of variation in terms of gross domestic product, GDP, across time for all the municipalities in Minas Gerais. The previous study was done in Rio Grande do Sul. I have done also research in Minas Gerais with the 853 municipalities in Minas Gerais. So I know some geography about your country. So this is an example that I wanted to show you that we cannot trust data all the time because sometimes the data might be wrongly collected. So for example, here we try to find the average of GDP across all the 853 municipalities of Minas Gerais for 2003, 2004. So we see that the GDP tends to increase slowly. However, in 2007 and 2008, we saw that the GDP went extremely high. That cannot be possible. It must be that the data was collected wrong, or they use a different indicator, or they use a different reference point. Does it make sense? So by doing these graphs, you realize something was wrong here. It can be possible. And then in 2010, look at how bad the GDP was across all the municipalities. So what happened in 2010? Was there a crisis across all Brazil, or was something that, or is just wrong data collection? Okay, but then we see that from 2011 to 2015, the data tends to be more obvious, that it tends to be similar to these years. Does it make sense? So not always use the data. Oh, this is the data, I'm gonna use it. We have to analyze it. We have to be sure that this is the right data. Otherwise, you are explaining wrong things, okay? And here, for example, I have the average number of employees and the municipal level across all the 853 municipalities of Minas Gerais. This is a research that I'm doing with Ricardo Correa Gomez from FGB. And also we see that the data from 2002 and 2016 seems to be wrong because these numbers went extremely high. These are 2 years that are outliers. So is this right that the municipalities hire more employees during these years, or was something reportedly wrong? Or the person who entered the data at IFBG or the Munich entered the data wrong, okay? So if I am doing this analysis, I have to eliminate data for 2002 and 2016 because it doesn't correspond to the reality. Is that clear? Okay, so now, also we can do comparative analysis. So actually by comparing all the states, already we are doing comparative analysis. But also we can do comparative analysis in terms of most similar systems, most different systems. That can be done at the state level, or that can be done at the country level. So for example, I tend to compare Mexico versus Colombia, okay? 2 different systems. Mexico is federal, Colombia is unitary system, okay? How they are doing in reducing infant mortality rate. Do we see the same patterns, or do we see that Mexico is doing better? Or do we see more variation across Mexican states compared to the 32 departments in Colombia, okay? So we see more variation, for example, in the case of Colombia. We see that Guainía has a lot of variation. We don't see the same variation across any state in Mexico. So what is happening in Guainía? That they move up and down all the time. You see? What is happening in Baupés? We don't see the same variation in Mexican states. So that is something that we should explore. Also, we can compare Mexico and Colombia based on other characteristics. I am not going to go into details because I think that I've already taken 40 minutes, okay? We can assess that variation based on the party of governments. We see that Mexico has had only one party until 1990, and then they had 2 more parties. Before it was only the PRI, then it was the PDP, and that also another party. While Colombia started with 2 political parties, and now Colombia has about 65 political parties. So why this multi-party system that probably might affect the performance of the departments, okay? And the same happens in Brazil. Brazil has at least 70 political parties. Is this multi-party system affecting performance compared to Mexico or compared to other countries, okay? So also we can compare the educational attainment of governors, Mexico versus Colombia. Who are more educated as governors? Are the governors of Mexico tend to be more educated or what? So we see that in Colombia, 10% of governors had only primary education. In Mexico, only 2%. But we see that in Mexico, 66% of the governors have only a professional degree. But in Colombia, we see that actually 62% of them tend to have a master's degree. So are more with primary education only in Colombia, but then most of them tend to have at least 1 degree of specialization, okay? So different thing. And the same we can compare them and public sector experience. So we see, for example, that in the case of Colombia, 40% of them come with 0 years of experience in the public sector, 0. While here in Mexico, only about 3% come with no experience in the public sector. This is a huge difference. So what is motivating governors to have more public sector experience in Mexico, but not in Colombia? Okay, very good. So, and we can compare more similar systems. So I can compare, for example, Brazil and Mexico. Both are what? Both are federal. Both are the largest countries in Latin America. So we see how they are performing. So we see that Alagoas tends to have a lot of variation in reducing mortality rate. But we don't see any Mexican state that varies in the same way that Alagoas varies. We see it also Paraíba has variation, but we don't see the same variation across Mexican states. So this is a way to compare, okay? Now we can compare also Brazil and Colombia. One is federal, the another one is unitary, but still, okay? We can compare even the states of Brazil that are close to the Amazon, and we can compare the departments of Colombia that are close to the Amazon or the Amazon area to see if they tend to exhibit the same level of variation because they are in the same region, okay? Very good. So, and another thing that is important to take into account in doing research is how the institutional context matters for explaining performance. It's true that management quality or managerial quality matters for performance, but it doesn't matter how qualified the manager is if the context in which that manager is not satisfactory for his or for her performance. So that's why we need to assess the context, institutional context. By context, that means what is the political environment in which that person is working? Does he or she has political support from the state level, from the governor, from the president, from the ministry level, okay? What is the type of power sharing? Is he working in a unified government or is she working in a divided government where the city council is against the mayor or where the state legislature is against the governor or the federal legislature is against the president? All these things matters for performance. So we can explain performance without taking into account the economic and the political context in which the manager is performing, okay? Another way and that matters for service provision. Another way is to take into account the role of salience when you are doing comparative studies. Probably salience is not too relevant, and for example, infant mortality rate is not too relevant in Mexico, but probably infant mortality rate is more relevant in Brazil. So you have to take into account that because one issue, a policy or program is more salient, we would grant more resources and we grant more power to that, okay? Another thing is in research is to identify, how do you identify problems in government? Who are the people identifying the problems? Does the government identify the problems through citizens, or does the government identify problems because the newspapers advertise them, or the news, or the social media? How is the problem identification done? Because that is something that is extremely relevant. New problems emerge every day, and someone needs to be there identifying these problems. Or is this NGOs, the ones that are bringing the problems to the attention of government? So you can find out that through research, okay? And to find out who takes the decisions, who adopts the solutions for the problems, who is in charge of the implementation process. You might write perfect policies, but when it comes to implementation, bureaucrats might implement things completely different from what was written in the policy. So policy adoption, completely different from policy implementation. And we need to take that into account. So in concurrent remarks here, I have suggested few research themes. We have a long road abroad to publish, but we needed to collect data in order to be able to publish, in order to generate standards, in order to generate patterns of behavior, because without data, we can't do that. And we need to collect objective data, data that is replicable, data that I can trust, data that I can collect over and over, and still I will get the same number, okay? Obstacles should not refrain us from doing research. We will have obstacles every time, but we need to overcome them. And this is just a motivation for all of us to do research, to cooperate in doing research. And please consider visiting me in Indiana University as a visiting scholar, but you can come here if you don't come, bring with a data set. Because every visiting scholar that I host, he or she has to publish an article with me. So far, I have hosted 38 visiting scholars from Brazil, 38. But I haven't published yet 38 articles with them. But we are in the process. We are in the process. We are working together right now on several projects, okay? So you need to arrive with a data set if you want to come here and for me to host you as a visiting scholar. Thank you very much, and I hope that it has been helpful for you. And again, apologies for those that already saw part of the presentation last week through INAP. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor. It was great to watch your presentation. It was a very, very intelligent and clever presentation. And the audience sent a couple questions, and I write down a couple too. And I'm wondering is in Latin America, we ask so much about the design of the federal state. If it's federative or is don't if centralized. You think this is cause much difference in the implementation of the police, or this is not a big deal? The design of the federal or unit system.
This is an excellent question, and this is something that scholars have tried to disentangle. From all the 198 countries in the world, only 38 are federal. Yeah, there are many studies that try to assess that, but this is difficult. Why? Because the best way to do it is having Brazil data before Brazil was federal, and then data after Brazil became federal. Does it make sense? And that is difficult. It's impossible. And if we compare just how the federal countries are doing versus the unitary country doing, it's also unfair because not every country faces the same challenges that each country faces. Does it make sense? However, Brazil is federal, but Brazil is also has a lower level of decentralization. Why? Because municipalities actually have a lot of responsibilities and certain things, okay? And for example, Colombia is unitary system, but Colombia has passed decentralization too. So municipalities are responsible for doing many things. In that sense, Colombia looks like a federal system, you see? Because a lot of responsibilities have given to some national governments. And it was since 1988 that the decentralization was passed. So that is a way to compare how Colombia was doing prior to decentralization and after decentralization, okay? That is a way to say how kind of federalism, because decentralization is a type of federalism, not by constitution, but by law. When the country is federal, is by constitution. You can't go back. But when the country is decentralized, that is by law. Still, the central government might say, let's cancel that decentralization policy and let's return to full unitary system, okay? So that is a way to do it. Or the other way is just to compare a country before and after federalism, which is quite difficult. Yeah.
Oh yes, it's quite difficult, and it's kind of interesting compare Colombia and Brazil, because Colombia has decentralized a lot of things in the past few decades, but Brazil is a federation, but it's highly centralized in policies, centralized in resources. The municipalities and are higher depend of the resources of the union send. So is a federation, the municipalities have a lot of responsibilities, but don't have authority about the policies. The authority is the central defined. Is Brazil and Colombia is a very interesting case of comparison. One is decentralized, but it's not what other hand, the other is centralized, but
the 1,100 municipalities of Colombia also depend very highly from the central government. All the money comes from the central government, and also all the policies tend to be enacted at the central level. So that's why they tend to be very similar. Actually, both countries would be very good way to compare.
Yes, the audience sent a couple questions, Professor. You can read it in the chat and the Zoom. A person anonymous. Okay. I will read it for you. A person writes, CLAD approved a document in the decade of the 90s, established the foundation of Manederv. I can't speak. Please, come, Leticia. It's a simpler word, but now I just block it. Sorry.
How to make an adaptive process and implement the national. Here, the question that I'm reading is how to make an adaptive process and implement the national public policies at the local levels. How can we theorize about mimetic isomorphism of development solutions? Excellent question. Actually, right now, I just published an article about isomorphism. When a municipality tends actually to copy from other municipalities good behaviors, you see? And guess what? We find out that when municipalities create association of municipalities and they interact more often, association of municipalities that produce coffee, association of municipalities that produce something else, because they interact very often, the mayors, one teaches the other what they are doing, and municipalities tend to copy, tend to emulate. Now, isomorphism refers about the fact that I might copy or emulate the behavior of someone else who is very similar to me. So probably a state or a municipality that is, for example, say the state of Sao Paulo. What is the state that looks close to Sao Paulo? Minas Gerais, could we say the same GDP or something?
Yes.
So whatever Minas Gerais does, Sao Paulo might copy. Or whatever Sao Paulo does, Minas Gerais might copy, because they are isomorphic. They tend to be similar in terms of GDP production, similar in terms of population, similar in terms of development, okay? But however, there is another theory that says we should copy from the leader, because the leader tends to be more innovative. So we should copy from the leader. The point is, let's adopt good behaviors from whoever is doing the well behavior, Does it make sense? It doesn't matter if it is from someone equal to me or the leader or someone from the bottom, because innovation also can happen from bottom up, not necessarily from top down, okay? To copy policies in terms of development, okay? Implementation. Okay, here I have the question that probably Lisandro was suggesting. CLAC approved a document in 1998 establishing the foundations of managerial reform. In it are highlighted the specificities of Latin American, basically. So what is the, in it, are they highlighted? Yeah, that is, I guess that I think what the person is trying to say. The new public management reforms was the boom in the 1990s. And then every country in the world wanted to copy these new public management reforms. The new public management reforms, some of them says, privatization. Let's privatize. No longer the government needs to be responsible because Papa government, father government doesn't have enough money, okay? So what we did was to copy all these reforms without thinking whether our institutional context was valid for adopting those reforms. That's why Bolivia tried to privatize water supply. And what happened? People revolted against government because they say, how are you going to privatize water supply? You see? So be careful. And also, I know that international financial institutions have imposed on Latin American countries the adoption of certain reforms. Another reform was more monitoring mechanisms. Another public sector reform was about collecting more taxes. That is true. We need to collect the tax capacity that every government has. But always bear in mind that what works in one country might not work in another country. What works in one municipality might not work in another municipality. So transplanting reforms is very dangerous. It needs to be done in a pilot program before it is completely open to everyone. That would be my advice, okay? So, but I know that CLAT did an analysis to say, let's see if Latin America can implement all these new public management reforms. But there are studies that suggest some public management reforms have worked and others no. Another reform was, for example, assessing performance. That now on, every government has to assess performance and report. But what is the point? Now people only care about doing the report, but not to use that information to improve themselves, because we just do the task of, oh, I have to submit this, okay? Next question. Oh, señal pregunta. Okay, hello, Professor Claudia. Glad to see you again. I was your student in the 2019 INAP class in Bloomington. Very good, Eric. Congratulations, Eric. Very good decision to come to Bloomington. So he's just saying hi. Okay. How to make an adaptive, oh, I already answered that. An adaptive process and implementation policies. Okay. I think that is all. I don't see any more questions.
I will talk in Portuguese now. As pessoas que estão nos assistindo, que gostariam de enviar perguntas para a professora Cláudia, por favor, encorajo que façam e a gente pode prosseguir aqui com o debate. Professor, I was thinking there is a recent literature about policy design was howled in important scholars as asking and researching. What do you think the potential of this strength of this field of the analysis in the local and municipalities policies?
Okay, if the municipalities have discretion to design a policy, that is okay. It matters a lot. But if the municipalities doesn't have discretion to design the policies, we need to study the design of policies at the federal level because they are the ones designing the policy, okay? But still, policies should not be designed homogeneously. So they should take into account, okay, The south region of Brazil tends to have more resources. So probably this policy should be done, implemented in this way or designed in this way. You know what I mean? Now, the studies that I have seen tend to say that there are 6 characteristics that matter for policy design. First one, having clear objectives. But remember that when legislators pass legislation, they write completely vague policies because otherwise no one will vote if they understand what actually they are voting for. So they tend to write very vague policies in order to gather more political support, you see? But by writing these vague policies, then the implementation doesn't take well because bureaucrats do not understand clearly what is the goal or the objective of the policy. Secondly, the policy should specify clearly what the treatment is going to do on society. So if the policy says, by implementing this program and contributing, for example, the Zero Hunger program, with this program, we plan to feed the people every day so everyone will feel healthy and they will contribute by working or by receiving education. Does it make sense? So I know that by providing food, I am contributing to the well-being of the person and making them healthier. So that is causal effect, needs to be specified. So the bureaucrat knows this is the impact that I'm gonna have on society in delivering this. The third one is that the policy, when it's designed, needs to have enforcing mechanisms. Those enforcing mechanisms could be incentives or could be punishments. What are the incentives that you are going to put into place to encourage people to implement the program? What are the punishments if they don't do it? If there are not enforcing mechanisms, especially in Latin America, we don't do things, okay? The fourth thing is assigning the implementation to the right bureaucrats with the right skills. So if you are going to implement a Zero Hunger program, it needs to be done by an agency that has the personnel, has the technology, and has the abilities and the skills to do that, okay? The last one, the next one is knowing that there is enough political support at the local level for the implementation of the program. It could be that you are implementing a Zero Hunger program, but there is at the municipal level some NGOs that are against that particular program. So they are going to be against that and they are going to obstruct the implementation, okay? Or the media, the news are against it. So they will be checking a minimum error to post it was wrong. And finally, if something external happens, like for example, the pandemic, make sure that the treatment that you are adopting is not still continues improving the problem that we are supposed to fix. Okay?
Okay, thanks for the answer. And the last question before we end it, is the pandemic. How you see how the local entities how respond to with the policies, coordination, discoordination of the local governments in Latin America. How you see this?
Very good. Actually, we just published in the Public Administration Review Journal of Brazil with Alqueta Pesi and with another colleague, Kohei Suzuki from Netherlands. We just published an issue about governmental responses during COVID. And we included articles from 18 countries in the world. And one of the things that actually we found is that the communication across level of governments is key, is essential for responding to the COVID-19, okay? That communication is essential because they might assign responsibilities to local governments, but if the local government do not have the capacity to do it, what is the, so communication is essential and providing them the technicalities that they need, either through workshops, through learning, sending employees from the federal level or to the state level to teach them how to do, especially for responding to COVID, technology has become essential. So if there is no systematization at the municipal level, there is no way for us to control vaccination process, neither the propagation of the disease. Okay, so I guess that we are done. Thank you very much. I always enjoy talking to Brazilians, and I hope someday to be back in person.
Thank you. The Getúlio Vargas Foundations, thank you very much for your time, for your conference. Was very, very good. And we say goodbye now to the audience. And we ended now. Professor,
So, Lisandro, is this Fundación Getúlio Vargas in Brasilia? Because I know that there is Fundación Getúlio Vargas in Sao Paulo and also in Rio de Janeiro. So is this one in Brasilia?
Yes, Brasilia.
So FGV is everywhere. Oh my goodness.
Everywhere.
Okay. Nice. Bye-bye, Camila, and bye-bye, Leticia. Thank you very much, Lisandro. Have a good weekend.
You too.
Bye-bye.
Professor, you wait a little.